much of a presentation. I've got some introductory material I'd like to go over first. But then this is really intended to be a group dialogue. The topic here is philately in the time of COVID-19, and it's a more specific subject within the broader context of philately in times of crisis. So what I'd like to do, if I can figure out how to do it.
Oh, you can do it, Gary.
All right, well, let's see.
I see screen share.
Okay.
There you go. Perfect.
All right. So let's see if this works now. All right, that's promising. Hang on just a second. That is not a beer. That is, that's Starbucks. Anyway, what we're going to do today is explore a bit about philatelic view of past health crises, stamps and the world of health, world health crises through the lens of postal history, and that, depending on how lengthy I go, might take 10 or 15 minutes. At that point, I want to turn it over to the group and find out your thoughts on COVID-19 as a philatelic topic. We're in the midst of it now, and there can't be a better time to be thinking about whether there are philatelic ramifications, what those might be in terms of stamp collecting and postal history, and what you're thinking about doing about it, if anything. All right, so this is really a topic that's talking about social philately, the study of society through the lens of philately. This is not the first topic on that subject, very obviously. There are many websites out there that deal with the subject of social philately. Indeed, if you do an internet search, you'll find 5 or 6 websites and dozens upon dozens of articles that will come up in various philatelic journals. Ever since the age of exploration and the Western European diaspora, mail has been very important for keeping society together. There wasn't radio telecommunications of any kind. There weren't cables under the ocean for telegrams. There was only the mail. And that becomes even more important, even more true in times when there are health crises, because everybody wants to know what's going on with the folks back home or the folks around the world in times of health crises. So much so that the literature is quite full of examples of health crises and the role that the posts play. Even if it's a tangential reference. For example, in 1985, Gabriel Garcia Marquez published Love in the Time of Cholera. This was a love story, a novel whose central theme really revolved around correspondence between two distant lovers, and at various points in the novel, the correspondence itself took center focus, including the difficulty in getting the mail delivered during the cholera epidemic. So let's take a look, a real quick look at some stamps that are related to health issues. For example, In the United States, we've got two examples here of commemoratives that were issued relating to the polio epidemic of the very late 1940s and into the 1950s. Well, not late 1940s, all of the 1940s and into the 1950s. So on the left-hand side, we see a 1957 commemorative, 3-cent commemorative issued. And it says, honoring those who helped fight polio. There were 187 million of those issued. And this is in the mid-1950s. Going to 1999, here's an example celebrating, quite literally celebrating the polio vaccine that was developed several years after that first commemorative was issued. So there are lots of examples all the way around the world of health-related issues that resulted in postal issues. What does that look like today in the current crisis? Well, the new issues are already starting to come out. Iran has already issued that stamp on the left, celebrating the health workers and the role they are playing in controlling the really horrible crisis that's going on in Iran. And the second, on the right-hand side, it's mislabeled. It shouldn't say Iran, it should say Vietnam. But this is a double issue. Again, celebrating healthcare workers. So there's a common theme here. And here's another example of a proposed design by the People's Republic of China for a commemorative sheet, a pane actually, again honoring the medical heroes in their time of crisis. I picked these three examples up off Twitter, and there's been some dialogue back and forth about, is this appropriate? Some folks take the view that this is just crass commercialism, an attempt to make money off of a crisis, and I can understand that view. On the other hand, post offices are involved in really two things when they issue anything other than a definitive stamp. When they're issuing commemoratives like this, two things they have in mind. One is a semiotic view of their society. What is the message that the government coming out of the post office really wants to send to its citizens and to the world at large? So in my view, it's wholly legitimate, wholly understandable for countries to be issuing stamps like these, especially in times of crisis, where it's really important to get the morale up, and stamps like these celebrating the heroic actions, truly heroic actions of the medical heroes in these different countries strikes me, and this is again my view, there's no right or wrong when it comes to philately or politics, I suppose, but this is absolutely typical of how governments through the postal authorities react in time of crisis, and many other times, of course. The other aspect, without a doubt, is to sell wonderful new stamps to collectors. And again, I'd be the last one to fault a post office for thinking about doing that. Let's talk about postal history as a lens, as a vehicle for understanding crises, the most health crises. The most common example that we think of is disinfected mail, very common theme. And what I'm showing you here is the cover of a 2000 issue of Pratique, which is the newsletter of the Disinfected Mail Study Circle. There is a study circle or specialized philatelic society for any topic under the sun in philately. The number of organizations like this is seemingly endless. And if you, when the APRL opens up and you want to go and browse, or if you want to go to the online catalog, the Philatelic Union catalog that's hosted by the APRL, you will see thousands upon thousands of different journals. So this is one from the Disinfected Male Study Circle. Dennis Vandervelde is really the heart of that organization. He's the editor. He wrote most of the articles over time. Very small, obviously specialized group. And for the past several years, he's been in ill health, and the journal has pretty much stopped publishing. Although last time I reached out to him, A, he was still alive, which was good, and B, he was hoping to get back to publishing, but he didn't know when. I've had conversations with him about granting to the APRL permission to scan and create PDFs of all of his journals, all of the society's journals, and make them available publicly through the APRL's website, where they host a variety of different electronic digital journals. The AP, of course, the Postal Literature Review, Philatelic Literature Review, and I think half a dozen other journals are all available to members directly through stamps.org if you go to the library section. So Dennis and I have been talking about putting this very specialized journal up as a perfect example of how a narrowly focused organization such as this can provide a really unique view of what's going on in philately. While he was the primary contributor to it, he was certainly not alone. There were a number of really notable authors participating as well. So this is an example of a specialized journal. Let me show you some examples from around the world of disinfected mail. Malta in the Mediterranean Sea was a regular quarantine station for French packets, the French mail ships, between Constantinople and Alexandria, in this case to Marseille. So here's an example from 1859 of an incoming letter, an entire, from Tripoli that was shipped to Malta. Here's another example that I clipped out of the Florida Postal History Journal from a more recent period in history. This is an 1888 example of a mail that was going from La Crosse in Wisconsin, headed originally to Florida and then forwarded back to Bradford, Pennsylvania. So this trip was, this cover was making a duplex trip and had a duplex cancel. And you can see two puncture marks right there, which is where a knife was inserted, a blade was inserted, and then the interior of the envelope was fumigated. It is generally the case when it comes to disinfected mail that the postal authorities were not bragging about it. They were being as surreptitious as possible, and the only evidence you had was slices through the envelope like this where fumigation was taking place. I won't go into the technology of fumigation. There's all kinds of different methods they were using. Nobody knew going back then what the cause was. Nobody knew what the solution was. So they were trying all kinds of different things at various points in time. Going back even further in time, here's a double letter sheet from Paris in 1803. And this was a folded letter. You can see where the arrows are pointing to folds where the envelope was slit, again, for purposes of disinfection. Now, we think of disinfected mail as being an historical event, but here's an example from the much more recent anthrax, I was going to say epidemic, but the anthrax scare, where somebody who I guess was never really caught, although there are theories, but mail was being sent to various individuals, in this case, Senator Leahy, and this particular envelope was intercepted and moved from the Capitol mailroom off-site to a secure facility where mail is disinfected or trapped. In this case, it did not get through to Senator Leahy's office. I can tell you that today, mail aimed at zip codes 202, 203, and 204, which is the capital region. Those are the 3-digit zip codes, are not going to the capital. They are routed to a secure facility in, I think, somewhere in Maryland, where all mail aimed at the Capitol is being treated, I believe, with microwaves to ensure that if there is any infection, that that is disinfected using microwaves. So you know, today is no different than any other time in history. For selected individuals, that being those being our elected officials, they are again disinfecting the mail. It is pretty much accepted that mail is not a likely vector for infection with COVID-19, but we know so little about it, even at this point in the crisis, that discretion being the better part of valor, they are doing that kind of treatment for our senators and congressmen, although it's probably not necessary. Why not? In any event, this is a real quick overview of various aspects of philately and health crises. It's obviously not a thorough treatment. It's something I put together in a couple of hours, but I wanted to give you a flavor for the different aspects of it. And really, I want to turn it over now, and I'll let Tom moderate again, but your thoughts on COVID-19 as a philosophical topic. And I want to do two things here. I'd like to hear you talk about the stamp collecting aspects as well as postal history. For stamp collecting, here are the questions I have, and you feel free to talk about any aspects you want, but in my thinking, here's some of the questions. Is your collecting in any way to reflect COVID-19 current events? Have I been muted?
No, you're okay.
Okay.
I have everyone else muted at this point.
Okay. All right, then let me
just
continue on.
Just want to
Let me
make sure
continue
that
on, then I'll get out of the way. So are you starting some new thematic collections or adding new countries to your collecting interest? What else are you changing in your stamp collecting pursuits? On the postal history side, and since I'm a postal historian, this is the thing that's got me really interested. Are you collecting or creating modern postal history that illustrates the impact of COVID-19 on society? What does that even look like to you? I don't know that I've got any answers, but these are my questions.
Okay, so anyone who has a question, please, in the group chat, tell me that you have a question and we'll open up your mic. Hope we didn't scare anybody off, Gary.
No. Well, I
Okay,
certainly
so
didn't answer all
I've
the
got,
questions. So.
yeah, I've got Rob, and hold on a second. I've got Rob unmuted.
Howdy.
I've got you, Rob.
Okay. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible for me to add anything new to my collection because I collect everything. Although, you know, if you look at my back banner, you can see I have been watching my mail. For the first time ever, I've gotten one of these covers that has been opened by Department of Homeland Security. That came in this week from Canada. It's probably, they were probably looking for fentanyl and it might not be related. I have no idea. I did start a thread out on stampboards.com showing this cover off and asking if anybody had seen any postal history that could be attributed. I didn't say this was, that could be attributed to COVID-19. Haven't seen anything yet. Although I've been emailing friends about maybe we should do some mail tests to different countries to see what comes up. I'm surprised I'm not seeing any disinfected mail stamps or evidence. I have a topical interest in scouting on stamps. I will finish with a share. Oh well, let's start. Let's point this out. I will share something on my screen if you don't mind.
Gary, can you turn off your screen share?
That's a valid question. Let's see if I have an answer for you.
I'll just hold this up. My wife and I were supposed to fly for a week of fun and frivolity in London on March 13th. It was part of my wife's employer's University of Dallas Reads program and their book for the year that they had students participating in reading, and also
have that upside down.
Schools throughout. It must be working. Schools throughout the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex area were participating in that with curriculum items. The Ghost Map is a journalistic nonfiction book. Won a lot of rewards. Narrative journalism. Thank you, dear. On the 1854 London cholera, and we were going to visit all the sites, drink from the infected pump, drink the beer that kept people alive, that kind of thing. The moral of the story, and all the postcards I was going to send to friends all over the world ended up getting mailed from Mansfield, Texas, unfortunately. But let me share my screen over here.
Sounds a little freaky, considering what's going on right now.
Exactly. The moral of the story is never plan a vacation based on themed.
We were supposed to be going on a cruise through the Panama Canal, and that didn't happen.
Yeah. Let me share my screen. I've got just a couple things I want to show. Can you see that? This is not in my collection, but there was in 1935 the Boy Scouts had planned their first ever national jamboree. It was canceled because of a polio pandemic. These are not in my collection, but I was aware of it because I've been involved in scouting all my life.
Right.
These are the kinds of things I'm looking for. Covers of canceled events today.
You find it yet?
Not any yet. Not any so far. The best I've found was, like I said, a cover. I managed some swap circuits for the International Society of Worldwide Stamp Collectors.
Why don't you look for that, Rob, and we'll come back to you in a minute. I've got a couple of questions here that
Sure.
that maybe we can get through while you're figuring that out. So,
Oh, no, I don't have anything. I'm looking for them. I'm done if you want to move on to other
okay.
people.
All right. So, hold on. I'm going to open up Richard Judge. Oh, no, now your screen's there.
I thought it was already up there. I didn't show the, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
This
Let me
is,
get Richard unmuted because he had a question. Hey, Richard Judge, you had a question for everyone? Hey, Richard, are you there?
Sorry, I think it was me. I think it was Richard Morel. Richard Judge said,
I
have a
had two
question.
Richards, but Richard Morel, go right ahead.
There is a bit of postal history here in the UK.
Mute us.
There's
Hold
a bit
on.
of post.
All
Hi,
right,
yeah.
Richard. Can you
Hi,
start
yes.
again, please? I had to mute
Yeah,
you for a second.
no, it's fine. The good news is, well, I'll say good news. There's a piece of postal history already in the UK. So the British government the NHS have identified 1.5 million people at severe risk from contracting COVID-19. And the NHS has written to all these 1.5 million people in the UK by post and by text. My mum's got one of the letters. I'm waiting for the cover. So there are going to be difficulties in that respect. On top of that, there's quite a few. I like Gary's lecture. I love the theme of kind of postal history and how postal history, pandemics, epidemics, it's nothing new in postal history. You get stuff going back to the 17th century, references anyway to them fumigating mail, and I've seen examples from the mid 18th century. But what's really nice as well about the philatelic aspect is, stamps don't just commemorate disease or pandemics, they also used as public health messages in their own right. For example, the numerous kind of stamps being issued in Africa and around the world for World AIDS Day, and also the SARS stamp for China, cholera stamps. Sorry, I have a bit of a cough. So there's a whole range of kind of interesting things, but I think as well that there's going to be there's going to be a lot of regionalism in terms of the philately and in terms of the hobby and the way that COVID-19 is going to impact on them. Just did a paper for the LP on COVID-19 and the future of philately, mainly looking at the British context, which we talked about earlier. But so I think some countries where the subject and the hobbies got an older age demographic, that could potentially have some risk. But I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting opportunities arriving, and actually your society is kind of spearheading that with these talks and lectures. But pretty much all I've really got to say. But there is some postal history here in the UK. So
Thanks. Have a question here, or actually a observation from Amir A, who doesn't have a microphone. He says, "Thank you, Gary, for the insightful discussion. Sadly, my mic isn't working. Here's an observation. Stamps are basically the only material souvenir we'll have of this event, kind of like military decorations. So not only do I approve of Iran and Korea issuing COVID-19 stamps, I think it's something we should encourage our country's postal administrations to do, because there's an opportunity to promote philately among the general public through this epidemic. Presumably many people who aren't stamp collectors would want to acquire these stamps, but few people would actually ever hear about them." Any comment, Gary? Gary?
Once I get myself unmuted, I'll
I got
have
you.
a
I got you. You're
Okay,
unmuted.
fine. Okay. Yeah, I happen to agree with that. It is not just stamp collectors. In fact, increasingly, it is not stamp collectors who are buying commemorative issues of countries. If you look at the issues that have been coming out of countries large and small, first, second, and third world, it is very much the case that the topics are aimed at individuals who wouldn't be stamp collectors. So you see cartoon characters, Star Wars, Star Trek, all these themes that have nothing to do with a particular country's culture, but represent an opportunity for selling stamps, and clearly not just to collectors. So when you have an important event, world episode like is going on now, sure, that's an ideal opportunity for postal authorities around the world to get themselves injected into social life through the topics they select. And the rapidity with which the nations that I showed as examples have done this, I think really demonstrates how governments and the postal authorities view the importance of communicating to the populace, not just because they're stamp collectors, but because they're members of society. So it's a great way to do messaging. And looking back 5 or 10 years from now, to Amir's point, yeah, these are going to be very important artifacts that reflect how society viewed itself in a time of crisis.
Great, thanks. Rob has started a screen share again. Rob, you want to talk about that?
I just put it up because they were talking about stamps issued, in the past. This is actually a coronavirus, which is an ancient thing. We've been suffering from coronaviruses ever since we became a species, probably. But AIDS is what ultimately kills. An AIDS sufferer is often a cold or a flu, a coronavirus, that is much more dangerous to them because they have acquired immune deficiency syndrome. I just put up a stamp here from Senegal on World AIDS Day. So as this goes on, I'm sure there'll be more and more stuff and world days of and fight.
Mm-hmm.
How much of a footprint this has on Philately depends on how long it goes on.
Right.
I will get rid of my screen, and I agree with everything everybody's ever said about how it's quite valid for governments to issue these stamps. Is very important. Not so much to every there's a profit motive in everything. I don't mind that stamp issuing entities are trying to raise money. It's my choice of what I buy and how much I spend for it. I get most of these stamps at 10 cents, 10 for a penny. If they don't turn up, I'm not disappointed. But the important thing is that they get messages out there that are important, like first responders are the bravest people in the world, and our medical professionals take terrible risks. Look how many of them have died in the early days of this.
Mm-hmm.
I
have I do have another question from Richard, Gary, if you're there. He says, with airlines cutting back on flights, do you expect to see hand stamps on first class mail indicating any delays?
That's a wonderful question. I wish I had a wonderful answer for it. Throughout history, auxiliary markings have been used by postal authorities to explain why mail is being delayed. I've always called that CYA marking, because basically the post office is explaining through an auxiliary marking, hey, don't blame me, we did our best, it's somebody else's fault. And that's probably the largest single area of auxiliary marking, is an explanatory to the recipient why the mail was delayed. I don't know in reality whether there is going to be much delay in the movement of mail. There may be some delay in the final point of delivery because the local delivery folks are at great risk being out and about. So there may be some scheduling delays there. But as far as the airlines themselves are concerned, with the decrease in human traffic, they've shifted to cargo traffic to make up some of the revenue shortfall. So they are now discounting their freight rates in order to capture what used to be ground shipments and maintain some sort of flight schedule. So I would imagine that air delivery will continue relatively unabated. I wouldn't expect to see much in the way of those kinds of delays. Mm-hmm. And if what we see is point of delivery delays, it's too late at that point for an auxiliary marking to be placed on an envelope. So I'll be very curious to see what the answer to that question is, but my speculation is we won't see much.
I think
go ahead, Richard.
So yeah, I think a lot of it's going to depend on several factors. First of all, how long it goes on for. At the minute, the official line, I believe, in the US and over here in the UK is that, you know, there's a minimal risk of contamination by mail. Nevertheless, there is a new rhetoric appearing in the UK, and in fact, there was an unrelated advert tonight that demonstrates it, that a recognition that COVID-19 can survive on different types of surfaces for different lengths of time. Tonight, there was a supermarket advert on the TV, and one of the pieces of advice was, don't touch food unless you intend to buy it, which means that they're beginning now to worry about this transmission. The question is, you know, will they worry about how long it can stay alive on paper or card? Other things to consider will be the kind of it's a very virulent disease. You know, in Europe, the projections aren't good. Germany's predicting about 70% of the population to get it. UK between 60 and 80%. And then there's a question of how quickly the population obtains it. I'm actually self-isolating with a cough myself at the minute. And a lot, you know, it's out there. But I think that it'll be a matter as well of how much of the workforce is down at any one time. I think Gary's right. It's not likely, but I wouldn't yet say it's impossible just yet. But I think time's going to tell. It's hitting Europe very hard, and it looks like it's hitting the US, unfortunately, really bad as well.
Yep, it is. Brian had something to share. Brian, your mic's open.
Yeah, can you hear me, folks?
Yes.
Yep.
I figured I'd share this only because it's probably a pretty rare event where you've got somebody who collects Iran on the call. But I don't know if you can see what I'm sharing right now.
No, right now we've got a black screen.
Okay, let me see if I can find a way to get that back on my screen. Bye-bye. Didn't think I was this challenged, but maybe I am. On an iPad, so it's trickier. More virtual background.
I will say that if you participate in worldwide forums, Iran is pretty popular.
Is it? Yeah. Well, you know, I guess I'm in my bubble, so you know, I know the know the folks, but just what never had talked to anyone at APS about it.
On a worldwide forum, it's a little irritating being a Yank because not all Iran stamps are that pleasing to.
Yeah, and you know, and modern ones aren't. I don't know if they're still illegal here, but I have so many older ones that I don't really concentrate on it too much. Let's see. I got a little camera down here. Let's see. I'm really surprised.
Why don't I, I'll put in a question here while you figure that out, Brian.
Sure, go ahead.
Amir is wondering from Richard, are the postal offices, are they operating normally in the UK right now?
I'm receiving mail. I received some mail this morning. I've not received any international mail yet, but I'm not expecting any. So we do have a postal service still in operation in the UK at the moment in some form. With the social distance and the lockdown of not being out, so I don't know whether the post offices are open or not. The postal service is running. I don't see why not.
Right.
I have my usual volume of international mail, trading partners all over the world. This came in yesterday. It's a packet of stamps from Australia. Transit time 21 days, which is pretty normal. I got one of my postcards sent to Canada was posted. I've had, on Monday, I had the 2 items, including the censored item from Canada. It seems like it's still normal for me from international.
Looks like Brian got a screen share up.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, so this is, I looked back, I think this is the earliest one that I have that's referencing the medical field. And it's these 2 gentlemen. I guess that's a 6 real, but they have a 2 real in the catalog. And then I found this one from probably the 50s. I didn't have a chance to look these up yet. They were just in my stock. And then these were immunization stamps. But just to speak to the fact that, you know, Iran has had these stamps, has honored their medical profession for years. So, you know, yeah, they're probably looking for some recognition with it, but it's not new to them.
Right.
And I just thought you guys might be interested in seeing something that maybe you don't see too often. That was all.
Yeah. Anyone else have any questions? Any thoughts? Just let me know in chat so I can open your mic.
I was going to point, I was kind of expecting us to talk about philately in crisis, about the hobby in general, but I was kind of surprised that we weren't talking about how all of our stamp club meetings are canceled. My local club's big show in November, what will happen to it? We missed our first our planning meeting, and if it goes on another month, we'll start missing dates and deadlines for things we usually set up, like cancels.
Right. Yeah, everyone's being impacted by that, and that's why we're doing what we're doing today. Obviously, having the ability to have a virtual stamp club here, and I hope and the offer is out there. If anyone wants to get together their stamp club and utilize our Zoom platform, I'd be happy to set that up for everyone. The nice advantage of Zoom as well is that I'm recording these sessions, and then I'm posting them up to YouTube, and I could do the same thing for any club that might want to participate like that.
I made the offer to replace our April 1st meeting of the Mid-City Stamp Club in Arlington with a Zoom session on my own for up 40 minutes and 300 members. I'll manage that. It won't last.
We have the account that we have. We can get up to 100, just just so you know. So we'd be willing to help with that if you feel like you're might go longer than 40 minutes.
We'll see.
Okay, great.
I think we got it covered.
Okay.
Hey, Tom, this is Scott. I want to add a couple of things. One is, Gary, I enjoyed the congressional piece of mail that you had Senator Leahy's office. I was working in the Longworth building, which was the other affected building from the anthrax attacks in 2001. And We had to spend more than 6 weeks off site. It's a very intense heat process they use. For those of you who are interested, I made a comment online the other day about this, but it's a very intense heat process that is used when processing that mail to protect it. One of the things that came up during the latter half of 2001, at the end of 2001 into 2002, is we had a rash of cases of individuals who were having difficulty breathing, were experiencing side effects from opening the mail because it creates such a byproduct inside that envelope. So if you're opening numerous envelopes, I'm not talking 5 or 10, but really when you're talking, hundreds of letters a day, you start inhaling this dust to the degree that it does physical damage to you. And so there were different procedures that had to get put in place. The heat process is still something they intend to use, but any public official, any elected official is going to have a screening process for their mail going in and out. And many of you may recall this from the letter bomb scare from about a year ago. All of the mail that was sent to former elected officials got stopped at some other station and screened. Rob, to your bigger point though of how this is going to affect the hobby, I have to be honest with you, it's too early. Since I've been the executive director of the APS though, I have preached the purpose of technology and digitization for a reason. It overcomes a lot if you're capable and flexible and able to adapt on the spot. Traditionalists have often wondered aloud why I care about being able to access technology, and then we get to a moment like this where we're all on lockdown. The physical elements of the show are great and very appealing, and without requirement, they become the tradition that we don't want to walk away from. But the reality is now, I think you're going to see a cycle of shows that are just going to take a hit. Some of them may have lasting damage and some of them don't. What I want to see coming out of this, though, is a little bit more of an open mind. So, for each one of you on this call today, you've got folks who they couldn't adapt to technology if you pleaded with them, if you paid them, or what have you. We have got to adapt. We have got to really do that. And I have been a gentle evangelist on this, but I think if we've learned nothing else in the last couple of weeks, it's that we really don't have time to wait around and hope that things get to stay the way that we want them to stay. That the reality is, if this hobby is going to remain vibrant and healthy, then we have got to adapt with it. There's a longer conversation that comes with this. You'll start reading me talk about it a little bit more. We can even have a chat session about it. I've got to meet with our dealers next week to talk to them about how they're being impacted right now with show cancellations rolling out the way that they are. But if you're planning to go to a stamp show or organizing a stamp show anytime between now and probably July or August, I'd be concerned that there's really going to be, that's even going to happen. So here's my rant for, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Do you think the New York show is going to happen?
You're talking about NoJex in November?
The one in August, or the Great American Stamp Show?
Yeah, that's our stamp show. Right now, the convention center that we're dealing with has a very aggressive attitude. They actually contacted us this week because they're trying to plan a convention right after us, the Monday after our show was over. So they're asking for us for some flexibility. So I'm going to leverage some more out of them instead. I'm not going to say no, it's not going to happen.
Right.
But folks are, if we get to August and we are able to congregate, I think it'll be the biggest show we've ever had because there will be a bunch of stamp collectors dying to get out of their house.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I totally agree with you in terms of computer literacy. I mean,
yes,
that's the thing. I mean, I'm a former elementary school teacher, and we had to learn.
Right.
There was no ifs, ands, or buts, and I still see it when I go and sub.
Well,
Same thing. I mean, the teachers have to be computer literate, and the kids certainly are.
Well, and look at this platform. You know, there's a way you can call in. You know, you can call in to just start out that leap into technology, and then I hope that you know some of our members who are not that well versed in you know in connectivity will learn in little steps. You know, once they call in, they see that they might be missing something by not participating. You know, in this kind of chat by being able to see things. So
Right.
maybe it's just one of those things that they just gradually get started and we build it up from there.
If I could piggyback in on Scott's comments, I think there is two threads at work here. One, which we've just been discussing, is the threat to the infrastructure of the hobby, and I think we've covered in terms of naming the issue. The other side of it, though, and I'm always looking for a silver lining in every cloud. That's just how I'm built. But I see this as offering the potential to reinforce the real value of this hobby within society. And one of the things I'm really happy to be participating in watching the APS take leadership is in getting out there and getting the message, not just preaching to the choir, not just talking to our own membership, but the outreach that we are initiating to get to the broader community, to those that might be inclined to collect stamps, by showing what the hobby is all about and by not being a closed circle, but an open community. So I think coming out of this crisis, coming out of this tragedy, there really is the potential for creating a market for members, creating a market for philatelists where none was seen before. I'm very optimistic about that.
I'm in total agreement with Gary. Actually, Gary, I'll send you after for private viewing if you want my paper on COVID-19, the future of philately, because it does touch on a few of the points you raised. I think that there's two issues here. One of which the APS is really leading on. What strikes me as someone looking at it at a global perspective is the lack of any leadership in organised philately in terms of outreach at the moment. There's nothing from the Royal Philatelic Society. I'm kind of semi-formally acting on behalf of the British Library's philatelic collections, but globally, I'm not hearing anything like what you guys are doing. It's not happening in China because it would have come to my attention. It's not happening in India because I've got contacts there. It's not happening here in the UK. I think that there's a split here. That the outreach, I think you have found a great solution to. And I think it's a great way to engage with a new audience, because for the first time, we've got a captive audience who are going to be bored. They're going to want to be informed. They're going to want to be kept entertained. The real challenge, I think, is going to be in the collecting aspect. And a lot of this depends on how long this goes on for. So, I mean, at the moment, yes, some dealers, major dealers will have stock, but the longer this goes on, how are they going to replenish that stock? How are they going to be able to go out and visit and pick up stock? And then likewise with mail, with the mail services become increasingly affected by that, how are we going to get that stock delivered? So I think time's going to be a crucial factor. But what one hopes is that you get them interested in the subject, that when things resume to a semi-normal point, we can then really run for it. So I think that virtual stamp shows, looking at various online platforms, how we deliver content, is going to be key. And in a way, for the business and the dealers, it's going to be very much a long-term investment in really driving that home. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I've been using technology, and I've been online and very active in forums since 2011 at least. I've been carrying my, starting back with the days of the Palm Pilot, like that's the 80s. I was carrying my inventories and want lists around in my hand to stamp shows. Whenever I hear someone bemoaning the death of the hobby, They're traditional Luddites who don't understand that there have never been more collectors in the world. It has never been easier to find out anything you want to know about any particular mystery stamp. Never been easier in the world to sell a stamp you want to sell or buy a stamp you want to buy. I have a blog I maintain online, and 2 days ago, after these APS, I got hooked on these APS meetings. I made a post on it, and I closed it with saying, "This is a real chance. I might say, almost a real danger that organized philately will actually learn where to find all the new collectors." And I closed with a banner: "Help philately participate online." Of course, I have like 5 readers for my blog, so. My wife says
Well, we have 17, including yourself, on here. Perhaps you'll pick up a few followers after this chat.
Well, I'll share.
Have you also
today, General Motors and Ford need to start building. Do we know how many have dialed in? Does that participants include how many people have dialed in, or just the people who are online?
Robert, do you have a television on or something?
Yeah. I'll turn that off.
Yeah, somebody, I'm going to mute you for a minute while you get that taken care of.
One of the things I publish on is the BL Philatelic. The British Library doesn't have a dedicated philatelic blog, so we tend to blog on non-philatelic sites. So the Asian and African Studies blog this year, I did something on public health and AIDS awareness stamps. I've done stuff in the American stuff, looking at kind of women and the founding of the American state. And I get hundreds of readers, but they tend to be not your traditional philatelists, more for kind of a general audience. So sometimes it's from my experience, it's just as much about where you're publishing, where you're projecting, as it is. It's great to see so many people using technology. You're right, there are a lot of Luddites out there.
Yeah, it also depends. I mean, I know Gary was talking about how these stamps were not being bought by collectors. He and I have a different view of what a collector is. I do know the Postal Service in my youth used to claim that there were 20 million collectors out there, and they were correct. People who bought stamps and saved them for something because they looked nice. And that's even more true today than ever before. People squirreled away Elvis stamps or whatever. Are they collectors? Sure. Will they ever pay $45 to join the APS? Very few. But that is where ultimately dealers get restocked from, and a small percentage of them will, get more serious, or those items, those souvenirs, that memorabilia will end up in the hands of their children who might get an interest. So I think they're collectors. The Postal Service has gone from dealing and listening to organized philately to dealing and listening to marketing experts who are selling popular culture to the public. That has been a trend since the Elvis stamp, and it's not going to go away.
No. Stan, did you have a comment?
Yes. Gene Ziss and I got together yesterday, and it looks like our monthly Charlotte Philatelic Society meeting will be held online next Sunday. We're going to probably do a dry run this weekend so that Gene can get a feel for the technology. But I agree with Scott. I think this is our new normal for philately. The digital, the technology. I've learned this week that there are a lot of people like me. And that's pretty interesting because I'm a history buff. And, I didn't know Rob before this week. And I see Rob got him a microscope, the digital one that I had.
And I made a blog post on it. I'm disappointed I haven't had a chance to share it, but whatever. I share an image on the screen, but nothing came up.
I saw it, Rob. So send us a link to your blog. Put it in the chat for everyone so that we can go visit.
Yes.
Yes, please.
And one last comment. I posted today in the virtual stamp club which Lloyd DeVries runs. And the question I asked was, should we use Clarity for watermarking or Roncinol for watermarking?
And I voted.
I know you did, Rob.
Thank you for mentioning that. I will have to jump in and opine. I've got a few choice opinions on that subject.
Would you like to give those opinions?
Oh, sure.
I'd love to hear them.
Absolutely.
Well, I've done a survey of our expert committee, and many of them use 2 or 3 different kinds of watermarking fluid. Clarity is the most common among those. Some of them admit to using Roncinol, and that's perfectly fine. I did an experiment a while back where I bought 4 cans of Roncinol and I put it in a dust isolated environment and watched it evaporate in a watermarking tray. And nobody will ever convince me that there isn't some residue left behind after that experiment. So I'm not a big fan of Roncinol. I've spoken to my peers at other expertising organizations who have a diversity of opinions. Some only use Roncinol, but, and I'm not going to tell the members of our expert committee how they should do their work, but I personally did an experiment. I'm convinced it leaves a residue.
Anyone else have a comment?
Thank you, Gary.
Sure.
I try to use light mats. I try to avoid anything. I think the less you interfere with the stamp, the better. So I tend to use light mats. But that being said, I have the advantage of a museum's tech. So you know, there are kind of cheap light mats and things out there that can be purchased. You just rest it on. They use them for books, for watermarks, checking books, and 95% of the time you can spot the watermark without any difficulty. But then you have the light damage, so it's difficult.
Right.
Yeah. Well, one of the advantages we have back in the shop is a device called the VSC 6000 that at the moment has a toothache, so we're not using it, but or a camera ache, I suppose. But VSC 6000, with its wide variety of light spectra that it uses, can pick up watermarks and do different kinds of measurements concurrently. And we can really extract information out of a stamp that most other technologies, whether we're talking about light or watermarking fluid or some of the other devices that are out there, just are not as successful in doing. So
it's a great bit of kit, that.
Yeah, I've been experimenting with my digital microscope while you were talking. I put some Roncinol on it. I'm sorry, it's old habit. It's easy to find. On the stamp with my USB microscope to see if it was a useful tool. Certainly, it's easier to share the watermark on with someone in a meeting like this with the USB microscope than it is with any other way I can think of. I'm thinking if I get some thin colored foils, red, blue, green, I wonder if the USB microscope would help with that, like cheap man's VSC.
well, a better approach is to change the color of the watermark tray. Here's a real deep, dark secret in watermarking. If you've got an orange stamp, for example, rather than use a black watermark tray, get the blue top off a Skippy peanut butter jar.
One refinement I made that I don't know, Stan probably invented it independently, is I don't use the tray or my tongs to move a stamp because I don't want to, manually manipulate that stamp so much. I put it on a black cardboard square and move it, slide it around. Now I just need to go to the craft store and get a variety of other colors, is what you're saying.
Yeah, so you take the complement of the color your stamp is. If it's an orange stamp, use a blue background. If it's a yellow stamp, use a purple background. You guys can all figure out the color wheel. But that methodology is proven to be a bit more revealing than just the standard black tray.
Maybe if I can get some backlight underneath the stamp and use foils instead of black squares, I might have the best of all worlds and even better virtual VSC. We'll have to play with that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's about 10 after 4, and we've had an enlightening discussion today. I think I'm going to wrap things up. Appreciate everybody's comments. Gary, thanks for an enlightening presentation. And we're working on our schedule for next week, and I'll be posting that over the weekend. So everyone, thank you again for a great time, and have a good weekend. Stay safe and stay healthy. We wish you all the best anywhere you are. So please stay safe. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
So Thanks.